Shalom, and thank you for watching this video from HaDerekh Synagogue. I hope you are liking the content we are bringing you. If you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, that will greatly help us. And to further help bring great content to you from our teachers, if you could please consider to donate to HaDerekh Synagogue. The link is in the description box below. Thank you for watching. Shoftim, the Torah portion for this week, goes through a lot of things, right? We go through judges, officers, right? We go through what is called the rebellious elder, right? The rebellious elder. And what is the end result? What is the takeaway from the rebellious elder? Don't follow his view, follow the rove. Follow the majority, right? If this elder has to listen to the majority. So it says Torah. We have idea of a king in this Torah portion. So the question is it a commandment for Israel to have a king or not? The majority of sages would say, yes, it is a commandment to have a king. We're not going to go into it that deep, but I'm just letting you know that there's many sages out there, and you can look it up, that would say that this is a commandment for Israel to have a king. And it's just not, we have to be careful in the wording, is how you want to have a king. Do you want to have a king to have a leader, or do you want to have a king to be like all the rest of the nations, right? That's it. If you want to be like the rest of the nations, right, what book can we look at that to find out that? That would be Shmuel. Shmuel didn't really agree with it. Why? Because Israel said, so we can be like everyone else outside of Israel. Not the fact that it was a king being a bad thing, right? And then you get to read, since, if Israel's going to have a king, the king has got to do this, 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 and this. And so you would think, well, if Hashem didn't want Israel to have a king, why would they list out all these things that the kings would have to do? Right? You got to write a Torah, always carry a Torah. Right? You have to do many, many things as a king in Israel. All right? And so now, as we continue on through this Parsha, we have the Kohen, we have who can go to war, right? And I'm just highlighting it, right? But who can go to war, right? Can a newly married person fight in a war? The answer is no. Have you dedicated your brand new house? Can you fight in a war? No. Are you scared? Should I fight in a war? No. Don't. You just make everybody else scared. You're going to spread everybody out. How about no? Right? Right. All right. But what we're really going to talk about is the beginning of this portion. Judges. Shoftim. You are to appoint judges and officers for all your gates in the cities. Adonai, your God, is given to you, tribe by tribe. And they are to judge the people with righteous judgment. You are not to distort justice or show favoritism. You are not to accept a bribe. For a gift blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of even the upright. Only justice must you pursue, so that you will live and inherit the land Adonai your God is given you. And that is from the complete Jewish Bible translation. I would say that because we are going to talk about translational things a little bit later. So, we're talking about here judges. We're talking about courts, a Beit Din, or a house of judgment, if you will. So this is important, because from this, the Beit Din is where we get oral Torah. This is where we get how we walk out our lives. How do we know this? Right? What judges, what court cases do you judge? How many judges? What are you going to do? What's this system? Okay? But before we get into that, this passage should be a reminder for another passage, another Parsha, back in Shemot, back in Exodus. What is that a reminder of? It's a reminder of Yitro, or Yisro. In Shemot, chapter 18, Yitro says, I will give you some advice. He's talking to Moshe. And God will be with you. You should represent the people before God, and you shall bring their cases to God. You should also teach them the laws, the teachings, and show them how to live their lives, halacha, right? How to walk, and what work they should do. But you should choose from among all the people competent men who are God-fearing, honest, and incorruptible to be their leaders, in charge of thousands, hundreds, 10s, 50s, and 10s. Normally, they will settle the people's disputes. They should bring you the difficult cases. But ordinary matters, they should decide for themselves. And in this way, they will make it easier for you and share the load with you. This is Yitro talking to Moshe. What beginnings that of the foundation of the work that Yitro was giving this advice to Moshe. Moshe should follow this. Well, what happens as a result? Did Moshe listen? Enter Parsha Shoftim. Moshe did listen. And now we have a court system of what ancestrally would be, well, and I say ancestrally, but it would be about like 40 years prior, right? Ancestrally, the court system that Israel is to have, right? And then you'll see, even in this verse in Shemot, how the walking out of lives from the deciding of cases. You decide cases. You walk out your life. Oral Torah. This is how you do it, right? This is how Israel does it. You know, it seems like we've been talking a lot about it. Well, because it's always there. People like to ignore it, but it's there. Okay. So now we have what we call now a Sanhedrin. It's the Greek word. It was a Knesset, or it still is a Knesset in Hebrew. Well, what is the biggest number for a Sanhedrin? What about the Great Sanhedrin, right? The Great Sanhedrin. All right, that would be 71. Okay. In Sifrei Devarim 144, now the Sifrei is a legal or halakhic midrash on the book of Deuteronomy. Judges and officers you shall appoint for yourself. Whence is it derived that a Beit Din, a house of judgment, is appointed for all of Israel? In other words, when is a court or a house of judgment appointed for all of Israel? Right? We were just talking about bits and pieces. What about all of Israel? From judges you shall appoint for yourself, right? And whence is it derived that police officers, Shoftim, yes, I said it, police officers, right? There's someone's got to enforce something. Whence is it derived that police officers are appointed for all of Israel? From officers shall you appoint for yourself. Rabbi Yehuda says, whence is it derived that one is appointed over all? From you shall appoint for yourself, and they shall judge, etc. This refers to the appointment of judges, and they shall judge the people. And here's the kicker. And they shall judge the people even against their will. Think about that. Sanhedrin 16b. The Mishnah teaches that the Great Sanhedrin was composed of 71 judges, as we were just discussing. And then that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it was composed of only 70. So he had 70 or 71. At least that's what Rabbi Yehuda would say. As Moses gathered 70 men of the elders of the Jewish people, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Moses himself was not counted as part of the group, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But the Gemara, since this is a Sanhedrin, which, by the way, I just like to mention that a lot of what I'm going to be reading from the Talmud, right? If I take this stuff from the Talmud, why do I take things from the Talmud? Right? From our Daf Yomi cycle. All this year, we have been reading what in a daily cycle? If you've been reading it, Sanhedrin, Makot or Makos, Shavuot, right? And now we're reading Avodah Zarah, which coincidentally, or not coincidentally, is what is in our Torah portion, at least the part that I'm talking about in the beginning. And so you can get to understand judges and officers you appoint for yourself because the Talmud, the sages go through this. Very minute detail. The Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of the rabbis who say that when Moses gathered 70 men, he was the head of the court and is therefore counted among them. So in other words, the rabbis say he's accounted among them because he's the head of the court. So therefore, if you have 70 elders plus Moshe, you have 71. And the verse states, and the Lord said to Moses, gather me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders of the people, and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and they shall stand there. All right, so you have a great Sanhedrin. This is the body. The great Sanhedrin, their decisions help set up the oral law. It is this great Sanhedrin that decides these things, right? They also decide death cases, death penalty cases. So, according to the sages, according to some, they would say the great Sanhedrin would be declared a destructive or a bloody tribunal if a death penalty was given in 70 years. Some would say 7, but it ended up being 70. Which is interesting. Why is that? Because there's many people today that would tell you, hey, look, man, it was mean back in those days. They're always looking to kill you. If you look at Torah, if you do this wrong, you do that wrong, you get the death penalty here, there. You get this idea. The law is bad because it's always looking for the death penalty and this and that. What we're trying to tell you here is that the great Sanhedrin and the Sanhedrins that decide these cases actually looked for any way to exonerate, any way to give life. And therefore, if they had a death penalty that was actually instituted or this person was executed, it was actually declared a destructive or bloody tribunal. What does that say? That says that they were not trying to kill everybody that did something wrong. It wasn't like that. So we were talking about Sanhedrins. We're also talking about in the land. Now, are there Sanhedrins also outside of the land? Yes, there are Sanhedrins outside of the land. There are Sanhedrins that are in Israel, in the land of Israel, and there are Sanhedrins outside of the land of Israel, right? Unfortunately, not everybody was inside of Israel. So you have people that are in, like, say, Yeshua's time. You have people that are in Babylon. You have people that are in Egypt. You have people that are, Jews that are in Rome. You have people everywhere. They had synagogues, proof of this archaeologically, that they're everywhere. So if you had an issue, say, in Babylon, which historically, if you go back in time, the exile to Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar, right, Rabbi Bernstein, may his memory be a blessing, would teach, and it's true, that you would have Sanhedrin or a Beit Din instituted in Babylon. It was called the Men of the Great Assembly. And they would help and decide court cases, halakha, and so forth. But here's the question. So you have a Sanhedrin outside of Israel and a Sanhedrin inside of Israel. Which one's better? Which one's greater? I wouldn't say better. I would say which one is greater in importance? The one inside of Israel is of greater importance. To the point of, say, for example, you have an unfavorable judgment outside of Israel. You could go into the land of Israel and be retried there for possibly a different verdict. However, if you had a verdict given to you inside of Israel, you cannot go outside of Israel to get a different verdict. Israel's decision stands. So Devarim, Rabbah, Midrash. Number 5, Judges and officers you shall place for you within all your gates, that the Lord your God has given you for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with fair judgment. So, halacha, a person's relative. What is the ruling? Is it permitted for him to sit in judgment for him? In other words, is it permitted to sit in judgment for your family member that you're related to? And this is what the sages taught. These are considered relatives. One father, one's brother, one's father's brothers, and one's mother's brothers. The answer is no. You cannot judge your own mother, brother. You can't judge your relatives, because that would be unfavorable justice, which we're looking for. We're looking for favorable justice. When I say favorable, I mean we want justice. So now we're talking about judges. When we have in verse 19, you're not to distort justice or show favoritism, right? You're not to take a bribe. For a gift blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of even the upright. So, kabut, that's it. 105b. Rava said, what is the reason for the prohibition against taking a bribe? Right? Once a judge accepts a bribe from one party, his thoughts draw closer to him, and he becomes like his own self, and a person does not find fault in himself. The Gemara notes that the term itself alludes to this idea. What is the meaning of a shochad, or a bribe? It can be read shehuchad, as he is one, meaning he's at one with the mind of the litigant who gave him the bribe. A person should not judge a case involving one whom he loves, not involving one whom he hates. In other words, I can't judge somebody I hate. He would not judge one whom he loves, as he will not find any fault in him, while with regard to one whom he hates, he will not find any merit in him. Right? You can't judge fairly on this. So, I know it seems like I'm getting into the detail about this, but this is what Torah does, and this is what oral Torah does. Right? It's just like, oh yeah, set up judges. Read on. That's not how it works. We need to understand what Hashem is telling Israel to do. So what is the result of bad judges? Right? You have bad judges. What happens to the judges? What happens to Israel? A result of bad judgment. I take information from a blog of a person I know. This is Slade Henson's blog, of whom I'm getting this information from. By the way, if you haven't looked at his blog, I'd suggest highly that you do. And if you're watching this on YouTube, description down below. The reason why I say to go to Slade Henson's blog, which is address of sladehenson.wordpress.com, is that everything that he teaches, he puts there in the blog. Like last week, he gave a list of things about Yeshua as a Navi Shecher. And be like, wow, I wish I had that list. It's there on that blog. You can look at it, and then you can go back and study even more. So I highly recommend you go to it. But on his blog, we're going to talk about bad judges and the first temple. We often equate the destruction of the first temple to what? Idolatry. Immorality, meaning, sexual immorality, and bloodshed. There are other reasons cited in the Midrash and Gemara that is connected to Devarim 16:20. Justice you shall pursue, so that you may live and inherit the land, but if not, you will not inherit it. So the Gemara, which is part of the Talmud, in Yoma 9b reminds us what we often call the three cardinal sins. The three cardinal sins: idolatry, avodah zarah, sexual immorality, gelul arios, and bloodshed, which is shefichas damim, which is bloodshed, is referring to the court system. In Shabbat 119b, and also Bavi Metzia 30. Jerusalem, I say this because what was one of the reasons for the exile to Babylon? What was one of the reasons? Well, people say idolatry. You would be correct. What is also one of the other reasons? A bad court system. Jerusalem was destroyed because they judged according to Torah law and did not go beyond the letter of the law. Does that sound familiar? In the New Testament, when we're talking about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and that you would think that they're opposed to each other, they're not. Here, in the Talmud, they are stating here that Jerusalem was destroyed because they judged, the court system judged according to Torah law, but did not go beyond the letter of the law, meaning they didn't follow the spirit of the law. What does that mean? Although they technically followed the law, they did not temper it with fairness, compromise, or compassion. This is the court system they're referring to. The Beit HaMikdash, the temple, cannot stand on cold legalism. We're talking about the first temple here, right? We're not even talking about the second temple. We're talking about the first temple. Beit HaMikdash cannot stand on cold legalism. It requires justice permeated with chesed, mercy, grace. In Echa Rabbah, or Rabbah, 133, the Midrash ties Yeshayahu 115 and 21 to the judges. Your hands are full of blood. And this is judges of the first temple. Your hands are full of blood. The faithful city has become a harlot, filled with murderers. The Tanhuma, a Midrash, Shoftim 7-9, confirms when it says, one who takes a bribe, which we were just talking about in the Torah portion, one who takes a bribe corrupts justice, blindfolds its eyes, causes exile to Israel, and brings famine to the world. The Midrashim say the judges are responsible for bloodshed through corruption and bribes. Corrupt judges perverted justice and hastened the destruction of the first temple. So therefore, justice you shall pursue, so that you may live and inherit the land. So what is Slade saying here in reference to what the sages are saying? If your court systems are not doing good and fair justice in your judgments, you will lose your inheritance to the land and you will be kicked out in exile. Did that happen? Yes. How many times has it happened? Twice. How about this? In the second temple period, right, the biggest thing that the sages will say that we lost the second temple was because of what? Baseless hatred, and not chinam. But that's not the only thing. It was also bloodshed. Their judges were not judging correctly. How does Hashem think about judging our courts correctly? Right? What about judges who, they're actually not just the judges of Israel or the court system of Israel. What about a personal judge? What happens if a personal judge does not judge justly? In Sanhedrin 7a, any judge who judges unjustly may lose his life as a result of not judging quickly, right? Judges don't get a pass on this. They have to, or they could lose their life. I go to the last part of our verse, or passage that we're reading today, is justice shall you follow? Or as we were reading in the Complete Jewish Bible, only justice you must pursue. So what does this mean? Well, Sanhedrin 32b states, the sages taught, the verse states, justice shall you follow. Okay, so this teaches that one should follow the best, most prestigious court of the generation. For example, follow after Rabbi Eliezer to Lod, and after Rabban Yonachan ben Sakai to Beror Hayil. In other words, the Sanhedrin has given you an example of a good court. Always go to the most prestigious court if that is possible. What does Ramban say about this? Nachmanides. Ramban says, justice, justice shalt you pursue. Go seek a reliable court, that thou mayest live and inherit the land. The appointment of qualified judges is of sufficient importance to sustain Israel and to settle them upon their land. Of course, this is Rashi's language, according to Ramban. The reason for the repetition, or the word justice, is to indicate that the judges should judge the people with righteous judgment, and you must always pursue justice constantly by going from one place, from your place, to the place of the great sages. Ibn Ezra, justice, justice. It is mentioned twice in order to indicate that one should pursue justice, whether it be to his advantage or loss. In other words, you pursue justice even if you're not going to gain anything from it. And so that you will live and inherit the land Adonai your God has given you. Sforno says this: such qualities are even greater importance than in the land of Israel, as the failure to comply will result in the ancestral right to that country being denied to you. And he states, or says, compare Ishayahu 57:17, who quotes God as telling him that a corrupt judiciary, i.e. getting away with sinful greed, was a primary cause for Hashem's anger at the people. Okay, all right, so I just gave a relatively boring treatise on judges. But what does that mean? What can we do with this? Hey, Aaron, that sounds great and all. Hashem cares for judges. But when we look at Zedek Tirdof, what are we supposed to look at that? How am I supposed to, let's say, take this home? And I guess the question I would ask is, what would Rabbi Bernstein say to this? Right, because this is a favorite verse of his. Everyone should know this. Zedek Tirdof. We've talked about translation. I mentioned about translations earlier. What a lot of translations would say, justice, justice you shall pursue. Right? Well, what is another word for Zedek? Righteousness. Okay, so righteousness, you should pursue. Then when we're talking about translational into English, sometimes your translators into English will try to find, according to the Rebbitzin, will try to find the best word that might fit their thinking. But it's still a translational bias, that's in my opinion. Right? So is it justice, justice, or if it's righteousness, righteousness? The answer is yes. So Rabbi Bernstein would teach this: 2 commandments. Love God, love your neighbor. Righteousness, love God. Justice, loving people. Righteousness and justice shall you pursue. Right? We have to understand that righteousness is not a condition. We don't say, Slade, I have attained righteousness today, I'm good for the rest of the week. You don't attain righteousness. What do? You pursue righteousness. Because why? It's not a condition. We pursue righteousness. Just like the courts should pursue justice, right? You pursue righteousness. It's not something you will attain and be like, we're set, we're done. That does not happen. That's not the way it should be. We pursue righteousness. Always pursue righteousness. Which is what? How do you love God? Seriously, how do you love God? You follow Torah. Righteousness. It's a path, right? This is not new. I'm not teaching anything new. Rabbi Bernstein taught this many times on this same parsha, year after year. But it has to be reminded to us that we must follow the path of righteousness and constantly pursuing it. Right? It's not a condition, it's a path. Right? You're pursuing righteousness not to gain anything from it. You pursue righteousness because you love God. Right? Which means you follow Torah and you try to follow Torah better? Right? Do you have to follow every single mitzvot better all at once? No. This portion comes in the time of Elul, just before Rosh Hashanah, where we're taking an introspective look at ourselves. What can I do better next year? One mitzvah, do better. Right? Eating kosher. You can do better next year. I can do better next year. How about the Shabbat? Sure, I could do better. I am not there. Oh, I am not. Right? We are to pursue righteousness. Always pursue. In that, we stay on the path. And if we get off the path, just jump right back on. Don't beat yourself up if you fall off the path. Just get back on. Just get back on. So righteousness, righteousness shall you pursue, forever pursuing, because we love Hashem. Shabbat Shalom.